Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 15th edition of APJ Kolkata Literary Festival. I would like to extend a warm gratitude to all the partners of the festival: refreshment partner Chabar, gifting partner Taifu Tea, healthcare partner MRI Hospital, radio partner 93.5 Red FM, event partner Navkreet, hospitality partner Kenilworth Hotel, institutional partners APG School and iLead, festival partners Australian Consulate General Kolkata, alias Fawcett de Bengal, Embassy of France in India, and Tollygunge Club. We embark on the second day of the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival with Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury and Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay. We have here today Lopamudra Maitra, Prasun Roy in conversation with Jashodhara Chakraborti. Lopamudra Maitra is a visual anthropologist, author, and columnist. She works on history, popular culture, and the intangible cultural heritage of India and South Asia. Prasun Roy is a veteran writer and has recently translated Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay's horror stories and is also a biographer working on unsung heroes of India and legendary personalities in Bengal. Jashodhara Chakraborti writes, translates, and teaches and speaks for a living. Her books include The Word Keepers and Sky Serpents, and the translations of Heman Roy's iconic adventure, Jashodhara, was published in 2023. I would request the delegates to please come up on the stage and start off with the conversation. Thank you.
But I think we make a little circle, otherwise we'd cut,
Well, thank you very much, AKLF, for having us for this session. Thank you, Anjum. It's probably the first spring day of the year, and I think we're all feeling rather festive. Prasun is to my right. His book is, in English, it's titled The Devil's Teacup. Mine is called The Treasure of the Khasi Hills in translation. And Lopamudra, whose book we all secretly envy because of its production quality and how amazing it looks, is the translator of Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury's Stories for Children, the entire set. This is a session on translation, like a few other sessions on translation happening at the festival, because translation obviously is having a bit of a moment. It's like across India, Prasun, we are discovering the joy and the wealth in literature, in languages that we have not experienced ourselves, and we want to share our own joys with others. So I think that's wonderful news. We are focusing on, however, 3 iconic authors of Bengali literature, and the translations of some of their most famous works. So I'm going to start the session by asking all of us to kind of talk a little bit about the icons, because I see that it's a young audience here and you might not be aware of who they might be. So can I just start with Lopamudra? Tell us a bit about Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury.
Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury, a name probably more famous as the grandfather of Satyajit Ray, but in his own area, he was a very significant man because he was a fantastic writer, a poet, and had great interest in publishing, the entire method. So did a lot of studies, lots of books, and set up finally his own publishing press, printing press, called as U. Ray and Sons. So that's where he started to put in his thoughts together And Shondesh, if you happen to know, is a magazine, children's magazine. Hardly nowadays practical. I believe it only comes during the time of Durga Puja. There's an annual publication, it's still going on. So it used to be a monthly thing once upon a time. It was started by him. So all the children's stories, that folk tales he used to gather with his own sketches, he started with Shondesh as well. So his two books which he managed to put together through his press, one being Tuntunir Boi and the other one being Golpumala, both I translated in my present, for the present book. And unfortunately, very soon after that, he passed away, very early. I think he was 52, 53 when he passed away. So, but then years later, his very illustrious son, Shukumar Rai, picked up the process of the printing press and maintaining the publication of Shondesh. Unfortunately, he too passed away very, very early. Many, many decades later, the grandson, Satyajit Ray, picked up the entire essence and restarted Shondesh magazine on a very, very regular basis. And also he had great influence of the grandfather. And one of the biggest things that we know him, Upendrakishore's work, is the very, very popular Bengali cinema, Gupi Gain Baghabain, which the original story is by Upendrakishore. Satyajit Ray did a little bit of change in the main storyline, but we know Upendrakishore through Gupi Gain Baghabain, the film by Satyajit Ray. So yeah, that's about him. He was a man, very big man, but and not only the grandfather of Satyajit Ray. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to hog the mic a little bit. Take a couple of minutes to talk about Hemen Babu, or Hemendra Kumar Roy, or Hemen Roy, as everybody knew him. Hemen Roy was a musician. He could play the esraj wonderfully well. He was a choreographer for theatre, very active in star theatre of the time, and famously, pretty much single-handedly adapted and invented for Bengali literature the genre of gothic horror and thrillers, ghost stories, modern ghost stories told in sort of the modern Western plot style. And he was incredibly popular with young adults, way into my childhood. I mean, and he passed away in, well, it's, I think sometime in 1963. So about 9 years before I was born. I'm quite old. But the grip he held and probably still holds over many people's imagination is phenomenal. And I felt that if translation is having a moment, translations for children and young adults, just like Lopamudra probably must have thought, must do. And this was a must translate book. So this is Jokhirdhan, his most famous adventure, and it has a companion sequel called Abar Jokhirdhan, as in the return of, etc., etc., which hopefully will also, I'll probably do soon enough. But moving on from Hemen Roy, a bit about Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay.
Good morning, everyone. And firstly, thank you, AKLF, Anjumji, for this wonderful morning today, for this wonderful session. Speaking about Bibhutibhushan. So, Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay, we somewhat know him apart from Bengal. The rest of the country and the rest of the world knows him as the author of the book on which Satyajit Ray made his iconic movie, The Pathir Pachali. Otherwise, Bibhutibhushan is fairly unknown to the rest of the country who do not read Bengali. But Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay was really an iconic man of his own time, I would say, because he was writing at a time when there were stalwarts of Bengali literature who were doing their works. Rabindranath was also there at that time. And he created a niche for himself. Bibhutibhushan, due to his work, profession, he needed to travel across the rural landscapes of Bengal And at that era, Bengal was mostly situated in the,
Prasun, I'm interrupting. His day job was as a, he was, I think, something to do with cartography or soil,
yes,
I forget.
That was, and he was managing a zamindari also at that point of time when he was traveling through Chota Nagpur. So he had a very intimate relationship with nature, with the rural, the forests, the rivers, and that comes out very deeply through his stories when you read them. Even when he's writing a horror story or a ghost story, you would see his vivid descriptions of how nature plays a role in all that narrative. It, as if the nature comes out as one of the protagonists of a story. So that is very unique in his style, which he had carved out. And his stories were mostly, about human tragedies, human solitude, and about human hope of that era, of the local people, and how that comes out through all his characters, through all his stories, is what makes him unique in his narrative. So that is what Bibhutibhushan was, in a very short way, I would say, because to describe him and his works, you need immense amount of time to talk about everything.
I'm going to come back to that, but I'm immediately drawn to ask Lopamudra, now that Prasun has talked about what was special to him and what gave him that impetus to translate, because there's always something that makes us say, I'm going to do this particular set of stories or book. What was it for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting story actually. So, as an academic, as an anthropologist, I do a lot of, I research in areas of narratives. So oral narratives, oral traditions, folklore, folk tales forms a very big part of it. So this was sometime in mid 22, I was delivering a lecture, particularly on some parts of historical reflection in the stories of Tuntunir Boi. Now, when I was talking on that, it was an international seminar, so I had to sum up a lot of the stories that I'm talking about into 2 lines. The entire story in 2 lines, 2 sentences, to get my essence through to the audience. After that, so I realized that there being no complete translation of all the stories, so this is something that needs to be done, because a lot of the essence of folktale and folklore lies hidden within these stories, and I think that it's something that even people of all ages are going to like. So then the discussion with my editor started, a fantastic woman, hats off to her. And yeah, we sat together, spoke and all, and that's how it came about. So, and I'm glad that that one day I delivered the lecture and the thought basically started like that. Yeah, thank you.
I want to ask you a question right now, because you talked about a lot of the messaging of folklore, and I've been thinking about that, because somewhere when I sat down to translate my thriller, adventure, story, somewhere when I think Prasun sat down to translate Bibhutibhushan, and you translated folk tales, there's a moment when you look at some of the accepted norms of the time, the fact that, dark and light is a thing, the fact that a king might have 7 wives, and they're clearly not empowered to counter anything he says, etc. In my case, I talked about this, a lot of hunting, because, shikar was a big thing, big game hunting was big in the turn of the century. And when Himen Roy wanted to create a counter narrative of Indian adventurers being as good, as brave, he picked up big game hunting as a feature. And we might all have a certain degree of discomfort with each of these concepts. But we go ahead and we translate anyway. So there must be a rationale in our mind. So what was your rationale?
Yeah, and this is a very interesting thing because a lot of, I'll just cut to that thing that a lot of rewriting of folk tales are taking place for that matter, for that exact specific matter. Now, one thing importantly to be kept in mind that a lot of these stories were not framed for kids. They were general stories of life and general reflections and thinking of life. And I'm talking about 100 years back and even more. So yes, when we talk about folk tales only for kids and children, so primarily the main audience, all those many years back, pre-printing ages, were not practically only the kids. So the kids' stories were, yeah, very different. But even during, when I was translating Upendrakishore's this book, a lot of the stories in this also do not really fall into the bracket of what a mother might be encouraged to talk about to a child. So there are abductions and there are killings which are made to be put in a very light-hearted manner. But keeping that in mind, that they are really not children's stories, I also believe that the kids, many of the youngsters are here nowadays. My own daughter is in class 10. Kids nowadays do know the difference. When that faith, we don't really put on them, but they do really know the difference. I mean, they do really know the difference of expressions, language, good, bad, scenarios, storytelling. Yes, they do know it. So even when I'm talking about a tiger abducting a girl, which is one story over here, it can be understood, and yes, they will be questioning that if the tiger was a man and he will be just picking up that woman, so it's not the right thing to do.
It actually
yes,
also reminds me exactly what the rationale of fairy tales is. You must have at some point in time read Red Riding Hood.
Yes.
It's actually about abduction.
Yes, very much so.
Possibly rape, possibly definitely serial killing.
Absolutely.
Because that's what the wolf is all about.
Yeah.
So these stories are also allegories.
Yeah.
But of course, in Bibhutibhushan's case, that wouldn't have been the situation at all. Was there any bit about Bibhutibhushan's writing that made you perhaps wonder, I'm a little uncomfortable with this. I personally don't necessarily agree, but I want to translate it because this book needs to be read.
Okay, so Bibhutibhushan's horror stories, if you see, there were about 40 horror stories that he had written, and for various age groups. And he wrote vividly about the occult also. So my first, when I first started to read Taranath Tantric, there were mantras that he had included about the tantric mantras which come into play, which he recited to do certain things, which, they're kind of, when you look at them,
make you slightly uncomfortable.
Yes. And there's a book, a story called Meghomollar. So it is about Tantra and the Buddhist occult. So that is what comes into play in his writings. So all these are different ideas which he used to pick up. He was a very learned man, and he used to take out all these things into his narrative and put it as a storyline. If you look at The Devil's Teacup.
Yeah, I was just saying, because I've just been reading both your books. They're so fresh in my mind. So if this kind of narrative interests you, I think you should get a copy. I mean, if folk tales interest you, definitely please get Upendrakishore Ray's. And if you like your dose of adventure, my one.
Yeah, and if you see the story Devil's Teacup, which is in Bangla, it's called Peyala. So it's talking about a teacup which has some paranormal activity inside it. So whoever drinks from that cup usually dies within a few days. And that's a very gruesome death. And it happens to adults, to kids also, which he says in this storyline. And it's very interestingly how a man gets that teacup to his house and he tries to get rid of it. and the teacup keeps on coming back to his home by some uncanny method or the other. So that is the story all about. So his horror stories were not just about, you know, a certain kind of paranormal creature or a man or a woman. They come out through objects also. So, you know, there were certain uncomfortabilities in those stories, but when you translate them and you read them, then you can see that today's readers can relate to it also. And like you were saying, the stories were certainly not written for children of that era, but if we look at the, you know, the youngsters today, the younger generations are young adults now, so they can distinguish between what they want to read and what they shouldn't be reading. So I think
exactly, and this thing is, I think we grew up when there was no such thing as, you know, this is age appropriate, this is not age appropriate. We were sort of free to discover books as we went along, and it was also, I think, completely appropriate to read children's books, so-called children's books, when you were, and as we do. I think it's more a descriptor of a state of mind than an age. I mean, that sometimes I'm very adult indeed, and sometimes I'm a young adult, and sometimes I'm 4 years old. I mean, and I'm okay with it.
You know, last week my 10-year-old son read The Devil's Teacup because he saw the title of the book and he liked the title. So he read this particular story and 2 other stories, and he came back to me a few days back and said, "Wow, I liked The Devil's Teacup. It's very interesting, the way the character comes in through an object and tries to scare you." So that's something which we see.
So I just think I'm going to pause for a second and ask if any of you at this point want to step in and ask a question of any of us. And then, you know, if we can swing by and ask a couple of questions ourselves. But if you feel like asking a question, that's fine. Just put your hand up. We'll make sure a mic reaches you. Fantastic. Hi. Hello. Hey. Just, we need a mic. Shomandeep, I see.
I want to ask, first of all, I'm very happy that there are so many translations from Indian languages into English. But I know that there are also many obstacles for translators. I mean, there are certain idioms, certain words that are very difficult to translate into English. Did you encounter any particular problems, like linguistic problems like this?
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Lupa?
Yeah, it is. It is a very big challenge, and I would like to mention specifically here. So this book, the original, has a lot of regional 2-3 line poems, which are basically called as chora. It's very, very difficult to translate a chora. I mean, the easy way out is that I just translate the essence and make meaning out of that. But then I wanted to do it the hard way out, that I wanted to keep the rhythm as well as the essence. So I ended up practically spending behind 2 lines, you know, a day, 2-3 days. So it is very difficult, and also because a lot of these choras are part of the, even now, a lot of proverbs, colloquial term proverbs also. So that I wanted to keep alive. But yes, it is a very big challenge, and probably the easy way out is to put it up as an essence. But if you want to do it the real hard way, that becomes even a bigger challenge. So I don't think there is a shortcut to that.
So in my case, I think what I found not difficult, challenging, but also extremely satisfying is the fact that this book had a message in code. And of course, the language is Bangla. The code is done basis a certain logic, which is mathematical, universal in language. And the letters are also Bangla, which has a slightly different system, where we don't have vowels as part of the entire set. vowels in Bangla are a separate set altogether. It's a separate block. We have vowels and then we have consonants. Hindi is just the same. So then how do you work backwards from there? So I remember thinking and taking my time over it and really enjoying myself over a cup of tea, that okay, I'm going to first translate the final message. And then I'm going to, once I know exactly what I'm going to say, I'm going to work back to the level of the letter logic. And it came out really well, and I was rather proud of it, and I loved doing it. But yeah, it wasn't the easiest thing.
You know, there are certain Bengali terms very, very specific to the region. For example, an aunt from your father's side is called Pishi, and an aunt from your mother's side is called Mashi. So both are aunts to you. So how do you get it in the translated form when that aunt plays a very significant role in a story, and the the protagonist is mentioning that particular character by that particular name? She's calling her Pishi in Bengali. How do you translate it so that you keep that essence of it? So those were certain terms which we had kept the original Bengali, explaining what it actually means, and then going on to refer by that same designation. So the original essence remains intact in that story. So that was something we did. There are certain proverbs, like you were saying, which you use, certain idioms which you use in Bengali. You refer to certain times, like there was a king called Ali Vardi Khan. So we referred to him as the era of Ali Vardi Khan. Now, a person who doesn't belong to Bengal won't understand what it means when you refer to Ali Vardi Khan. So at certain places, very limited places, I try to introduce footnotes, because footnotes can sometimes be very tedious to refer back. So there are limited number of cases on certain pages where we had referred to those names over there, because they needed to be there in the original story to keep their originality. So that was the challenge, and we tried to overcome it in this way.
Although I'd done the whole footnote thing, and this book was initially, because it was written as a serialized thing in a magazine for children, I tried to replicate that by doing a blog, a serialized blog on it. Eventually, it became a book. I realized that in blog format, I had the luxury of putting in more footnotes, because it's, once a week or once in a few days, and people kind of have the bandwidth to read 30 chapters, 30 footnotes. You can't put, I think, 30 footnotes in a children's book. So then you have to say, okay, I'm going to let go of some of the explanation and hope they Google it. And they do. So, any interesting, now my next question, I'm going to ask before someone else puts their hand up, unless you have a question to ask. Okay, I'm going to ask Lopamudra a question I really wanted to ask you. When you shared your book with readers, was there any unexpected feedback or viewpoint that you got that, made you think, not that it's right or wrong, but I never thought of it this way before? Because I got a couple of interesting ones.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest is that when you have readers from absolutely different language backgrounds from other parts of India actually writing to you saying that this is something, this takes me back to my childhood, and then I start thinking that how there is some strain of similarities. I don't know the person, not even the age group. So this little tuntuni from somewhere in Moimonsingo district, which is in present-day Bangladesh, actually can connect to even people now from very different parts of India, is something which I didn't realize. I thought, yeah, they are very subtle, simple stories, but if it can still resonate and take you back to your childhood from a very different language background, I think that was something I really found fascinating, and it was a very rewarding thing. So all those translation hurdles and everything, so finally I was like, it all paid off. Very satisfying to read that.
Mine was very strange, I did a few school runs with this book, as you do, and children came up to me and they said, oh my God, this was also green. I went there on my holiday such and such summer vacation, it was all built up and flats and big roads. And I realized this with a bit of shock, that we don't encounter enough nature in a lot of children's books in India today. And it's a testimony to how we live nowadays, you know. It was unexpected, but this book has had a strange, unintended effect on teachers saying, you know, when we do our geography project, maybe we want children to look at this book a little bit. So that was novel.
So I haven't received a feedback yet because this book just got released last month. But I would share one experience. You know, when my editor was going through this manuscript, and she was not somebody who could read Bengali. So she's reading the English version of the translation only. And when you read Bibhutibhushan, you would see, and many people of his era, there would be repetitions of certain explanations which I could find in Bibhutibhushan's narratives. When he's explaining a man traversing through a forest, there's a story called In the Forest of Umaibudu. So there's a man who is traversing through a forest, and he's describing the forestry, the spookiness when it gets dark in the forest and there's nobody around, and the nocturnal sounds of the wind passing through the leaves. It creates a sensation of, you know, horror inside you. So he keeps on repeating this in places. So my editor, when she was reading it, she's saying that, why is there so many repetitions over here? So I would have to make her understand that maybe if he has put in 5 places where this repetition comes, we have to retain at least 3 of them, because that is the essence of how he tried to portray that horror in the minds of the reader.
Through repetition. I mean, that was a strategy perhaps. I don't know.
Yes, that was a strategy perhaps. Exactly. So that was the feedback I got. And that strategy used to work well when you read even the Bengali stories now. When you're reading that line after a repetition of 2 pages or something.
Because it builds that rhythm, no? And
yes,
that build up of horror, rhythm works.
Absolutely.
We have in our audience today somebody who's actually worked on Taranath Tantric. Jayant. You were part of the Taranath Tantric series, right? Could we have a mic here? I just wanted to ask you about your experience of working with Bibhutibhushan. Mr. Jayant Kriplani. Yeah, there you go. There. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't resist it. It was like a fantastic fluke, and I thought I'd just take the opportunity.
Yeah, what was the question?
Yeah, you worked on Taranath Tantric for the series. I just wanted to ask you what it felt like to work on Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay's material.
Okay, you're talking to somebody who's completely ignorant about Bangla literature, okay, of any kind, smatterings of. And most of Taranath Tantric came to me via the director of the show, not via Bibhutibhushan. I regret to say this, but I'm saying this. But yes, it was very exciting working with this material, because the element of mystery and even though he's a, what is the word, Nimno Shreni kind of tantric, not exactly a highfalutin one. The relationship that he brought to the telling, I'm talking about Taranath Tantric, not Bibhutibhushan. The what Taranath Tantric brought to the telling of these stories was extremely, was a hell of an eye-opener in terms of, but there was no fear involved. There were no ghosts involved. There were, at least the sections that I was playing in, yes, there were. But they weren't actually ghost stories. You know, Tantric is a kind of strange thing where you actually experience what might seem like a mystery to you and might seem like a ghost story to you, but to the Tantric it's absolutely real, you know. So I don't know if I'm qualified to.
No, that's an excellent observation. Thank you very much. The reason I asked is because the occult as a genre has, obviously because occult in India looks very different, can be Indianized very well. And I'm just kind of going to leave all of us with the thought that perhaps that is what reading Taranath Tantric in Bangla gives us, a way to experience the occult, not necessarily the scary or the ghost stories or pulp thrillers or adventures. The occult as a genre, in a uniquely Indian, perhaps even a uniquely Bengali way.
Yes, and you see Taranath Tantric created by Bibhutibhushan. Bibhutibhushan wrote 2 Taranath Tantric stories, and the later stories were written by his son, Taradas Bandyopadhyay. So the description of Taranath which you see in Bibhutibhushan is an older man who has lived his life, and he now sits back and tells the stories of his experiences. And when you go to Taradas's explanations, that Taranath, skips between ages. So, like, there's a story which he would tell about his youth, when you see a different persona of Taranath coming out over there. So, I think the character has evolved as the father and son had written it over the ages of time. And, that character has developed so well. You can find a human connect. You can find, human satisfaction and loss about what he could have done and what he didn't do. And then comes the occult, like you said, and the way he explains how mantra works, tantra works, giving all the names and everything. So that's very, very, very interesting.
We have time for one more question. I'd love it if anyone in the audience put their hand up. Or, yeah? Sure. Thank you.
Okay, my second question would be about your authors, that they lived quite some time ago, and their language, I mean Bengali, was a bit, I would say, more archaic than Bengalis use now. When you translate it into English, do you try to keep this archaic part also in the English translation, or you just translate it in the, I would say, modern contemporary English, and you just sort of ignore the fact that it was written in different era, I would say, and that language has changed since then?
I'll let Lopa take that.
Yeah, language has changed since then, including the Bengali written language. Literature is very differently written nowadays. So yeah, but one thing I did keep in mind is that it's also being written and mostly read by whatever age be, but in the modern times. But completely I can't deviate from the past, but it had to be slightly made suitable, so that the present generation really understands what I am writing and trying to express. That has to be kept. It is almost like a very difficult bridge to construct, but the bridge has to be constructed nevertheless. So, yeah.
I prefer to keep it more or less contemporary, but there are references. There are references there which, are cultural. We may not be practicing those practices. So there's this bit about, there's a skull in the story, and this boy touches it, and his mother said, go and take a shower and, touch Ganga Jal immediately. That I kept. I mean, you have to keep it. It's part of the story, and there's a certain way in which she says it. You can't let go of that. But by and large, I kept it very light. I mean,
yeah, so it's like keeping the language as simple as possible and retain the originality of the story, I would say. Because to represent a particular author in a set of stories is impossible or representing his entire body of work. So keeping the essence of the story, the essence of that era, and explaining it in a simple language, contemporary language, so that readers today can refer to that story and relate to that 100 years old back event that was taking place in the story. So that is what I tried.
So thanks, our time's up. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. And the books are available for sale, and we'll be signing if you come by.